as usual, Dr. Pepper Zero. Still not sponsored. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Today, I was going to talk about the first two episodes in the series premiere of Born Again from the MCU. But what ended up actually kind of happening is I was doing some research into the comic version of the story, and I was originally just going to kind of comment about how similar and some potential story beats that I think they could take from the comics. But what ended up happening is I wrote down, I guess, what I would have done or what I would do if I was in their shoes. And I was trying to adapt this comic arc with the established canon that already exists from the Netflix series. So please enjoy. And if the show goes in a completely different direction than what I predict and ends up sucking, you can feel free to send this video to Kevin Feige because I will gladly accept a job. P.S. This probably goes without saying, but there will be spoilers for not just Daredevil Born Again, but also the comics and the original Netflix series and some MCU stuff kind of in general, mostly just the newer Captain America stuff post Endgame. So if you're concerned about any of that, there's your warning. The other thing is, if any of my predictions are correct, that might also inadvertently spoil something. But to be honest with you, after writing this script, I saw some screenshots from some upcoming things that happen, and I can already tell you there's one thing that I just don't think is going to be the case, but I still have hopes. Anyway, let's get on to it. To begin with, in the comic, Karen Page moves to Hollywood and she's trying to make it big. Her career fails and she ends up moving to Mexico, and she becomes an adult film actress, a drug addict, and she ends up selling Daredevil's identity as Matt Murdock in exchange for drugs. Kingpin learns this information, and that's really where all hell starts to break loose. So it's just like right from the beginning, it's absolutely bonkers. I'm already going to kind of interject here because I do think in the series, based off of the first couple of episodes, they might be starting this arc for Karen, which is going to be huge if that's the case, because I think they're using Foggy's death, which does not happen in the comic books, as kind of a catalyst. On top of that, we already know in the show that Karen has moved to California. So seeing her get into that downward spiral, I mean, it's kind of already on the table. But I do think that if we were to open in the series in the same way that the comics open, it would be really jarring for the viewer. But I do also have or think that Foggy's death is going to influence some other things later on in the season, but I will get to that later. Back to the comics. Kingpin, like I said, learns of Daredevil's identity, and he makes Matt's life an actual living hell. He conspires with a cop to basically ruin Matt's reputation. He gets the IRS to freeze Matt's bank accounts and credit cards so that all that he has is the money that's in his wallet right now. So Matt goes to confront the cop that Kingpin is working with, and he beats the hell out of him in his own home. He doesn't know completely who's behind this for a fact, but he suspects Kingpin, and he ends up just going completely insane. He actually ends up going to a bar and assaults the patrons screaming about Matt Murdock. And this is where I'm going to pause again. This is 100% something that I would love to see in the series. I know Matt is already in a dark place because of Foggy's death as of the second episode, but I really, really want to see them push it. Mostly because of the fact that we have seen him in a dark place in the original series and in Defenders as well, if I remember correctly. It's been a while since I've seen it. So we've seen him in these dark places already in the show. I really want to see them push his character into this like area. I would love to see this, and I'm really hoping that they keep this in. Because of the cop's false testimony in court, Matt loses his license to practice law, and this is, I think, a huge moment that just tears him completely down, and he becomes a complete shell of himself. After Matt loses his license to practice law, Kingpin blows up his apartment. This isn't super relevant. I mean, I guess it kind of is because like he becomes homeless. And like I said, he doesn't have his bank accounts or his credit cards or anything like that. He just has whatever cash is in his pocket, which is literally like we find out $10. But I did also want to leave this in because it's just batshit insane. Like, it's crazy. So, because he loses his home, Matt ends up in this shitty little motel with his $10 in his pocket, and he just continues to spiral. The hotel manager comes to Matt's room to collect the money that he's due for the room that Matt is renting, and Matt beats the hell out of him, too. It's like, it's just, why? Again, this is something that I would really love to see play out in the series. I am pretty disappointed that the Born Again plot needs to work around the established canon of Fisk knowing that Matt is Daredevil in the series, because seeing this level of psychological torture as a result of Karen's actions would be super fascinating. It is possible that they may be able to write it in a way that would make sense, considering how frequently Fisk does reference Matt's darkness in conversation. So I don't think seeing him push Matt to the edge in order to bring that darkness out is completely off the table, but I do see it as being a challenge if they do end up wanting to go that route. After Matt beats up the poor hotel manager, he's on the subway and these guys show up and they threaten everyone in the subway car. They're like brandishing weapons and all this other stuff. And Matt, he doesn't do anything. He doesn't do anything until one of the guys points a gun at him and Matt just snaps and starts beating up this guy too. And then a cop sees all this commotion and he comes to stop him. At which point Matt also beats the hell out of the cop. And after this altercation, he goes to a phone and he calls up Foggy and he just breaks down. He is telling Foggy about his psychotic break, how he attacked this cop because he's so paranoid that all of these people are working with Kingpin to take him down. And he's sick. And in order to get this to stop and feel better, he needs to go and he needs to confront Kingpin. After this conversation, we find out that he was just speaking into the phone. There wasn't actually anyone on the other line. In the meantime, Kingpin has people reporting to him on Matt's movements. He learns about the fight on the subway train, and he's just so happy that he's breaking and has broken Matt to this point. Once again, I love this, and I really hope that they keep it in. Like, yes, Foggy is dead, but knowing that as the viewer would make this scene so gut-wrenching, especially if it was done right, which I have so much faith in Charlie Cox that he would be able to pull it off. Matt's so far gone that he's calling up his dead friend who we know is dead, who he knows is dead, but he's still thinking that he's speaking to him because at this point, who else could he possibly turn to? He doesn't have anyone. It's just such a great way to show how mentally broken Matt is at this point. So after this phone call, Matt goes and he confronts Kingpin. But because he's such a shell of his former self, he just doesn't stand a chance. Kingpin was waiting for this. He was expecting it, and he just destroys Matt in this fight to the point where he thinks that Matt ends up dead. Again, this would be fantastic to see in the show. We've seen Matt and Fisk go against each other previously in the Netflix series, and I do believe that Matt got his ass kicked at that point as well. But I don't think that in the Netflix series, they kind of were going for like a more grounded approach to Fisk and Kingpin, and they didn't really showcase his like ultra scary super strength and like rage in a way that I think the MCU has started to portray him. I did not watch Echo. I did watch Hawkeye, and I do remember that scene of him going absolutely just crazy and smashing and beating the hell out of Hawkeye. Well, clearly you don't, because that actually happened to Kate Bishop, not Hawkeye. And I think this fight with Matt in the Born Again series would be another really good spot to showcase just how scary Kingpin can be. After losing the fight, Matt's stumbling through the streets of Hell's Kitchen, and he winds up at the gym where his dad used to work out. He passes out there and he's nursed to health by a nun. While at the gym, he starts to train and rebuild his strength. We're going to go to some side characters for a little bit here while Matt's in the gym doing his thing. In the meantime, Ben Urich has been digging into what's been going on with Matt since his behavior has been just so out of character. He speaks to the aforementioned cop, whose name is Nick, that worked with Kingpin, and his son is sick and dying in the hospital, which is why he decided to commit perjury. So Ben gets some information out of him, including the confession that he was paid for his testimony. But after Nick's son dies, he basically said, what's the point of all this? It didn't save my son. And he becomes Ben's informant. Unfortunately, Ben's nurse was working for Kingpin, as so many people are, and witnessed this whole entire thing. And so she goes and she beats Nick within an inch of his life. She's like a big hulking woman. I'll put a picture. In turn, that breaks Ben down to the point of him wanting to quit the story because he feels so guilty about it. If you don't remember, Ben is the reporter from the original Netflix series. I'll put his picture up here too. He is unfortunately dead at the moment. Well, at the moment, he's dead. Another interesting point that could lend some truth to the Born Again series setting up this arc is that Ben's niece, who is BB, seems to be following in Ben's footsteps as an accomplished investigative journalist. Granted, at the present, as of episode 2 anyway, it doesn't necessarily seem like she's against Kingpin, but it's possible that she has ulterior motives or her opinion will be changed later on. I think we have like 9 episodes this season, so we have plenty of time for her to kind of see the light. While all this is going on with Ben, Karen has been making her way back to New York. She's hit rock bottom and she wants to see Matt again because he's always been like a source of comfort and a rock for her, essentially. She does end up in the company of a less than savory guy who says he's a big fan of hers and will get her to New York safely if she keeps him company. He does protect her when some of Kingpin's assassins show up by blowing them away with a shotgun, but still, we don't love this for Karen. Regardless, she does manage to get back to New York. Now, I don't think the series will need to take it this far with how creepy and just gross and slimy this guy is. Honestly, like reading about him and the way that he speaks and acts towards Karen makes my skin crawl. So in my version of the series, she still does meet him and he is a fan and he's clearly not helping her just because he's a nice guy, but it would be more subtle than what's presented in the comics. So that way it's not sexual assault. So back to Ben. Because of his guilt, he goes to the Bugle where he works and tells J. Jonah Jameson that he's dropping the story about Kingpin and Matt Murdock. Jameson, in turn, gives Ben a pep talk in his own way and tells him how important his work as an investigative journalist is. He then tells him basically either be a journalist or go be something else somewhere else. So after this conversation, Ben receives a phone call from Nick, who is, of course, in the hospital after his massive beatdown. The nurse who beat him up then takes the phone from him and forces Ben to listen to her murder Nick in an attempt to intimidate Ben to fully drop the story. Unfortunately for her, it does have the opposite effect, and Ben starts pursuing the story much more aggressively. So this would be, I guess, technically another wrench in my dream adaptation for the Born Again arc. In the series premiere, we are shown that BB works for herself. She's basically an independent reporter. She must have like a YouTube series or something like that. But we can still have BB struggle with the inner turmoil and guilt that results from her investigation and just completely drop the involvement of the Bugle. Like we don't need it. But we could also have it, if you really want to throw in one of those MCU cameos that they're so famous for, she could potentially end up working for the Bugle, which would give us, like I said, that classic MCU cameo from J.K. Simmons. And on top of that, it would also give his character just a little bit more depth than just screaming about Spider-Man all the time. Like, I know there's not much more to him than that, but we could still maybe see just a little bit more. The only downside to her going and working for the Bugle, is I do think it's a lot of ground to cover to get her from working essentially for herself to working at the Bugle in just one season, because I would anticipate this arc being contained to the first season alone. Back with Karen, we find out that the shady guy that she's been traveling with is her dealer. And in New York, she meets with Foggy, and it basically explains to him how difficult her life has been lately and how rough. And then Foggy learns that the dealer that she's been traveling with is abusing her. And when he learns this information, he decides to take her in. Once again, Foggy is dead in the series, but I do think that he could be replaced with another character here. And my personal opinion of who that character should be would be Frank Castle. We all know that Frank and Karen have a bond from the original series, like to the point where the entire fandom basically was shipping them. And I think the general consensus, at least from me, is that if we don't get to see them share scenes together in Born Again, then we pretty much riot. And what better person to help nurse Karen back to health, help her through her withdrawals, keep her safe, and get so fucking pissed when he finds out she's being abused? Of course, Frank Castle. Ben, on the other hand, is now talking to the cops about the death of Nick, his informant, and he explains everything to them about how Nick was bribed by Kingpin to commit perjury during the case against Matt. And he ends up taking this story and puts it in the Bugle as a 6-part series. While in the absence of any concrete evidence, it's still considered to be a rumor. The seed has been planted that Kingpin isn't who he says he is, and he is, in fact, a criminal. In the meantime, Matt goes to meet with Ben, and they discover that the nurse that murdered Nick is in Ben's apartment, and his wife is hanging in the bathroom. Not dead, but pretty close. Matt and the nurse fight while Ben gets his wife down. The cops are called, and the nurse is arrested. Obviously, in this scenario, BB would be replacing Ben, and frankly, his wife could be replaced with just about anyone else that she could be living with, a significant other, family member, sibling, the camera person for her like vlog series, whatever. The most important part of this specific scene would be Matt meeting with BB and then the subsequent altercation between Matt and the nurse, which leads to the nurse's arrest. So while at Ben's apartment, Stilson, the guy who makes Matt's Daredevil suits, reaches out to Ben and he tells him that Kingpin is threatening him into making a Daredevil suit for Kingpin. Sorry to interrupt. It's actually a phone call with Betsy that Matt hears, not with Ben. Matt overhears this because he's got his super hearing. He visits Stilson and he tells him to do it. Kingpin's plan is to find an inmate who's being held at an institution for the criminally insane and have him impersonate Daredevil and send him in to kill Foggy. But at this point in the series, I think this is where Bullseye comes back in. It sounds a little bit nuts because we've already seen him impersonate Daredevil in the original series, and we know he's been arrested, tried, and found guilty of killing Foggy in the beginning of this series. So yes, it is retreading familiar ground, but I still think if they wanted to follow the comic arc, this makes the most sense. And yes, while I said he's already killed Foggy, but I mean, he could just go after Karen this time. In my version of things, they don't know that Karen is with Frank, just that she's in New York and the location of the apartment that she's staying in. Back at Foggy's apartment, Karen sees her dealer hanging out outside, basically casing the place. She tells Foggy about it and he calls the police. The dealer shoots them when they show up. Kingpin's henchmen, meanwhile, are also casing the place and tell Kingpin, who instructs them to kill anyone who leaves the building. While this chaos is happening, the inmate that Kingpin has hired shows up in his Daredevil costume, but thank God, Matt's there to intercept him before he can harm Foggy. There's an intense fight between the two that ends on a rooftop. Now, doesn't this sound familiar? Again, Bullseye is the fake Daredevil in the series, okay? And with him taking on the role of fake Daredevil once again, and Matt facing him outside of the courtroom for the first time since he murdered Foggy and Matt threw him off of a building, this would be a really big moment for Matt's character, especially after spending that time rebuilding himself. In fact, while the series would be going through kind of all of the side plots that end up being intertwined with Karen and BB and Frank, we could have those scenes kind of intercut with Matt, like I said before, training and rebuilding himself, but also having those moments of him healing mentally. So even after doing all of that healing and like work on himself, the inner turmoil after seeing Bullseye in the Daredevil costume would start to creep back in for Matt. Is he going to show us that he's still letting the darkness in him take over? Is he going to enact his revenge on Bullseye and kill him like he meant to do in the opening scene of the series? I mean, even the fight in the comics ends up on a rooftop. It's like the beginning of the show, and that opening scene was made specifically with this in mind. Ultimately, I think we would see Matt and Bullseye on the rooftop once again, but Matt will beat him into unconsciousness instead of attempting to murder him, giving him just a little bit of closure and giving us as the audience that growth that we wanted to see from him being at his most like very bottom and kind of starting to come back to what we know. While Matt is fighting this fake Daredevil, Karen's trying to escape. Her dealer's out there. Her and Foggy are being shot at by Kingpin's henchmen. Her dealer dies, and then she steals drugs off of him. As this is happening, she's still being shot at. She's stealing the drugs. Matt shows up, and he takes out Kingpin's henchmen. After this happens, Karen confesses to Matt that everything that's happened to him was the result of her selling his identity to some guy in Mexico. Clearly, if Karen in the series is going to be staying with Frank, this would need to be heavily modified, because in what world would Frank Castle let any of this happen? If I had to take a guess as to how they would modify it, I'd say the cops being called would be totally cut. The only people casing the apartment would be the dealer and Kingpin's henchman. Karen would still see the dealer, and the henchman would still tell Kingpin that someone else is casing the building with them, and Kingpin would still say the same thing, kill anyone who leaves, which is basically when we would see Frank come down to confront the dealer. And this is when the shootout would happen. Meanwhile, Matt's fighting Bullseye and overcoming his demons. Matt, of course, hears the commotion, and after his confrontation with Bullseye, he is reunited with Karen. If Karen selling Daredevil's identity ends up being part of the show, she would confess here as well. But regardless, I do think it would be nice to see Matt and Karen reunited after everything both characters have been through. So while this cute little moment's happening, Ben goes and visits the nurse in jail, who is more than willing to cooperate and answer any questions that Ben may have for her. Kingpin, being Kingpin, hears about this and sends one of his henchmen in to accompany Ben, posing as Ben's additional security. Kingpin blackmails the police commissioner in order to accomplish this, and when the nurse begins to speak, the henchman murders her in cold blood. Ben tackles the guy and beats him to death with the butt of his gun, which is fucking wild. And I wish they didn't kill Ben off. So this is another scene that I don't think is going to play out shot for shot in the series. I mean, primarily because Ben's dead and BB is, in my version at least, taking his place. But something that has happened in the series already is Kingpin blackmailing the commissioner. So I wouldn't be surprised if they're setting this scene up. This would also be a really great moment to have BB as a replacement for Ben, because Kingpin blackmailing the commissioner is a direct result of her advice that she gave to Kingpin during their first meeting. If the cops aren't on your side, you've lost the public. And literally, like a couple scenes after that, we see him blackmailing the commissioner to stay on as commissioner. At this point, things go a little crazy, and they only get crazier from here. So Kingpin is desperate to destroy Matt at this point and calls in Nuke as a result. So I do not know anything about Nuke at all. This is literally the first time I've ever heard of him, but Kingpin giving him false information regarding the current state of the country and how corrupt America is leads me to believe he's patriotic as hell. I mean, not to mention the American flag he has tattooed all over his face. But anyway, Kingpin essentially blames Matt for the current state of things, and Nuke goes after him. Matt is now working at a diner so he can support himself and Karen while she detoxes. And this is where Nuke shows up to confront him. Nuke literally, he just starts shooting up the place, not just with guns, but like rocket launchers, grenades, all kinds of things. He's going nuts. He even shoots down I'm not joking. He even shoots down a police helicopter. Matt gets his Daredevil costume on and starts to fight. It's like bringing a knife This is so dumb. It's like bringing a knife or a blind guy to a gunfight. Because Nuke has all these guns and Matt just doesn't. He does, however, finally get the upper hand, but as he's choking Nuke out, are you ready for this? As he's choking Nuke out, the Avengers show up and they take Nuke away. All right, so would have to be another heavily modified moment because no way. I mean, about the Avengers, of course. Everything leading up to that point is, I guess, technically fine, although I don't necessarily think I see them having Nuke in the series. I just think it's maybe a little bit too much and it leans too heavily into action and explosives. And that's just really not the tone that Daredevil has ever been. But in any case, we're not going to see the Avengers, I don't think. Like, actor commitments aside, the characters themselves, like Thor is dealing with whatever happened at the end of Love and Thunder, which I haven't seen in years. So I think he has a daughter at the end of that. So he's probably busy. And Iron Man's dead. But maybe we would see Sam show up as Captain America. I could definitely see it happening because Anthony Mackie is certainly no stranger to MCU Disney Plus TV shows, and Cap showing up in New York is definitely within the realm of possibility, but I don't even think that I would want that. As much as I'd love to see Daredevil interact with the Avengers or Captain America, I feel like everything leading up to this point has completely been Matt's story. It's Matt unraveling after losing Foggy, after losing Karen, after losing literally everything, and finally reaching his absolute breaking point, and then still managing to come back from that. It's about his journey to find solace and not allow himself to be beaten. Bringing in a huge cameo like Captain America during Daredevil's final confrontation kind of cheapens that for me, like a lot. This is the first canonized MCU Daredevil series, and I would love it to just be about Matt Murdock for once. Like, let's just let the characters have and do their own things. Like, you can still definitely have those cameos, and I have a place for Cap's cameo literally very shortly, but I just think that we don't need these grand spectacles in the Daredevil series. And yeah, I mean, that's just how I feel. But I do think that if they were to keep Nuke in and leave this scene as is without the Avengers showing up, Frank Castle being in addition to this fight would be incredible. It definitely feels like his speed. And I think seeing Nuke and Punisher face off, from the little I know about Nuke, my first knowledge of him, it feels like Frank's speed for sure. So after the Avengers take away Nuke, Captain America comes back to visit Matt and he asks him about Nuke. Matt, of course, doesn't know anything except for the fact that Nuke works for Fisk. So Cap does some research and discovers that he's not the only person who's experimented on with the super soldier serum. Nuke and others have as well. Obviously, in MCU canon, we and Sam already know this information, but it is still really cool to see it pop up in the comics. I do think that Cap showing up to ask Matt about Nuke would be a fine way to get that Captain America cameo in if it's really something that they wanted to do. Let Matt beat Nuke on his own or with Frank's help, and then he's taken away by the government. And afterwards, Cap comes in with some questions. So at this point, Nuke is detained and he goes berserk. He breaks out of his cuffs and kills absolutely everyone besides his handler. He takes his power-up adrenaline pills and he starts the hunt for Daredevil. Cap shows up, takes him out again, fights him, brings him up to a rooftop, which is like the main place of fighting, I guess, in the Born Again comics. And he's shot at by Nuke's handler from a helicopter minigun. Daredevil shows up and saves Cap, which is strange to me, but like I said, it's Matt's story, so fine. So yeah, Daredevil shows up, saves Cap, knows Nuke was hired by Kingpin, like I said, and takes Nuke to Ben so they can try to get some answers. Unfortunately, he dies in Ben's office at the Bugle before he can give them any new information. Things continue to get off the rails here, clearly. This kind of thing works in a comic book setting, but as a TV series, especially in the current climate of the MCU and how people feel about it, I don't think that if they wanted to adapt the series faithfully, that this would mesh well with the tones of the rest of the season. So here's how we're going to fix it. Cap doesn't show up to fight Nuke. We leave the Cap cameo with him just asking Matt about Nuke, coming up empty, and we can just leave it at that for now. We don't need multiple scenes with Cap. Like we just don't. At that point, it starts to become Captain America and the Winter Soldier minus the Winter Soldier season 1.5. And like again, this is the Daredevil show. Like this is what so many people have been waiting for so long. So I don't think that they would do this anyway. And I really honestly don't even know if any of this is going to be accurate with what they're going to end up going with, but we just don't need all of the Cap scenes. Anyway, Nuke still escapes, he still takes his pills, and he still goes to find Daredevil, and he finds him, and there's a fight, and they're both being shot at, but Daredevil manages to beat Nuke once again. Nuke still dies from his wounds, and Matt still learns nothing from him. That's it. We just need to take out the Cap cameo. In the comics, however, Cap manages to cross paths with one of Kingpin's henchmen who tells Cap Kingpin's whole plan. Kingpin then deals with a bunch of lawsuits, not jail time for some reason, and the public knows exactly what kind of person he is, a very dastardly criminal mastermind. But of course, Kingpin will not take this lying down, and he's clearly focusing on getting revenge. And that's where the comic ends. Once again, we don't need Cap here. Just let Daredevil find the henchman on his own and get the information out to the public to out Kingpin and take him down as mayor. In the series, in a similar fashion to the comic, with a menacing shot of Kingpin that tells us all we need to know. This isn't the last we'll see of him, and it's certainly not the last that Matt will see of him either. That's it. That's all you need, and that's Born Again Season 1. The comic generally is really good, but again, I do find the Avengers stuff a little ham-fisted, which is ironic, isn't it? Considering that forced cameos are one of the largest complaints about the MCU, when that's probably the most comic accurate thing that they could possibly do in their movies. I couldn't find a place for this in the main section of the video, but I absolutely love how the Born Again title card looks like it was ripped straight off the cover of a comic book. Exhibit A. So there's a couple things that I couldn't fit into my version. Specifically, I know Muse has been cast, but I'm not sure exactly how many episodes he's in because I don't want to spoil it for myself, and I don't even know if that information would be available. It is entirely possible that we just see hints of him throughout season 1 to set him up as the main antagonist for season 2, but I don't know. He could also possibly be a replacement for Nuke, but I don't know enough about Muse to say that he would be in like the final confrontation in that kind of way. Since I can't really get him to fit anywhere else in my version, that's going to be my explanation. The fact that he is being set up as the main antagonist for season 2, though I'm sure I'm probably dead wrong. From here on out, I will be recapping and reviewing each new episode of Born Again, and we'll see how much my story and version of things aligns with what actually is done in the show. These videos will drop every Friday, and I can't wait to see what happens personally, especially now that I've concocted this crazy, not really crazy. I just feel like I basically tweaked some things from the comics. But now that I know of the comics and I was able to form my own opinion of what I think could possibly happen, I think this is one of the projects that I am most excited for. And I was already really excited for it to begin with. I just pray that they don't let me down. So far, so good. I really did like the first 2 episodes, though. All right, so what do you guys think of Born Again so far? What do you think of my predictions? Do you think any of them make sense? Do you like them? And if you don't, what do you want to see from the show? That sounds really accusational. Like, how dare you? What do you want to see? But no, I really want to know, what do you want to see from the show? As always, thank you so much for checking out this video. And you know I'm going to say it. Please consider liking and subscribing. It would really help me out a lot. Thank you again, and I will see you next time. So stupid. Because Anthony Mackerel, Captain America, I'm sure I'm probably dead.